Which do you think is the second most dangerous country to work in as a journalist after Syria? Would it be Afghanistan? Would it be Bangladesh? Maybe China? The answer will surprise you. No. 8 deaths at the offices of satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo this year have put France in second place. This according to a new report from the Committee to Protect Journalists. Also pertaining to Paris, the New York-based Press Freedom Organization says Islamic State militants are responsible for the murder of 2/5 of the journalists killed this year, with the total number of deaths rising to 69, up from earlier years. In conflict zones such as Libya, Syria, Yemen, of course, in Iraq, it's difficult to ascertain who actually constitutes a journalist and actually who is a lesser in number than previous years, because fewer journalists are covering the wars, with local journalists fleeing the conflicts. That said, before we discuss these disturbing findings in studio, let's take a look at the following report, break it down.
A total of 110 journalists died in 2015, according to the annual report published by Reporters Without Borders. The biggest news in the report is that France was the third most dangerous country for reporters after Syria and Iraq. It was the jihadist assault on the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, which murdered 8 journalists, that gave France the dubious honor of a top 3 spot. RSF called the slaughter at Charlie Hebdo, quote, an unprecedented tragedy, and noted that a Western country had never suffered a massacre of this kind in the past. Some of the Charlie Hebdo staff have lived under close protection ever since the gunmen burst into the offices. A few of them still have to keep changing their place of residence.
Today, if you're a journalist, even if your audience is just readers in your country, your newspaper is only sold in your country, you're risking that nutcase on the other side of the world, groups of religious extremists putting you on a blacklist, and then other people taking action and coming to kill you.
According to the report, 2/3 of media personnel were killed in supposedly peaceful countries, as opposed to 2014, when the same ratio of journalists were killed in war zones.
The majority aren't journalists in the wrong place at the wrong time during a bombing raid. They're journalists who are murdered to stop them from doing their jobs.
In Syria, the northern town of Aleppo was described as a minefield for professional and citizen journalists alike. And in some cases, the journalists who are still alive were taken hostage by groups like IS to serve their propaganda, or imprisoned by the Assad regime, for example. Not all deaths can be attributed to terror and wars. In India, 9 journalists had been murdered this year, some of them for reporting on organized crime and its links with politicians, and others for covering illegal mining. That confirms India's position as Asia's deadliest country for media personnel, ahead of both Pakistan and Afghanistan. As 2015 draws to its end, the question still remains: if the role of the media is to be the guard dog of democracy, who will be the guard dog of the media?
Let's go straight live first to Iraq, where we're joined by Mohammed Salia. That's actually northern Iraq, joining us on the phone. Mohammed Salia, where in Iraq 5 journalists were killed this year, but that said, that's the number that we know. When it comes to covering Iraq, it goes without saying, it's getting harder and harder. I'm wondering out loud with you, if freelance journalists, if Western journalists, even continue entering at all at this stage in time?
Well, Iraq has never been really historically a safe place for journalists, and in the recent years, since the toppling of Saddam Hussein in 2003, due to the insurgency and the chaos, the situation has been really very dangerous for journalists, and Iraq has been on the top of the list of the most dangerous zones for journalists in the world. So for a lot of journalists, it's a very delicate matter in terms of being able to report on the issues that are important, and also at the same time trying to stay in the safe zone in the sense that they shouldn't or wouldn't want to really cross certain lines.
to cross certain lines. And what to me is so sad about that, because I think, and Ruthie Sinai with me in studio, when stories such as Iraq, where it's just incredibly important to get the information on the ground, rather than to discuss it with pundits in studios, it's the place where when it's getting almost less and less possible to cover the story.
Now I'm wondering if we can ask Mohammed if he's afraid.
Mohammed, are you afraid?
Well, in certain cases, definitely yes. Although in the part of the country where I am in Kurdistan, it is generally known to have a much broader space in terms of media freedoms. But there have been certain instances of journalists being killed over the past 5 or 6 years. And besides that, there is quite a significant amount of harassment of journalists in the form of lawsuits or, during certain incidents, for example, the protests or such things. Journalists have been beaten up or arrested by the police and security forces. So, as I said earlier, it's really a matter of maintaining a very delicate balance in terms of what you do and how far you want to go. It is definitely not free of risk.
Not free of risk is, I think is a mild understatement, even though you are in what we call, Kurdistan or northern Iraq, in that part of the country. But Ruthie, yes.
Yeah, no, I really think that, sometimes journalists have kind of an inflated sense of their importance in the world. So, let's put that aside. But I do think that journalists who cover such areas of the world, and whether they're deliberately targeted or harassed, as Mohammed said, or whether they just get caught up in the crossfire and so on, are vital. I can't express it enough.
Vital.
For the continuation of civilized life as we know it. For democracy and all these good things that we take for granted. There's a phrase that says that journalism is the first draft version of history.
Right.
So that's...
not to tout our own horn, but it truly is in many ways. It truly is, and I think that if we could, if we'd look back, there are so many instances in the last decade and a half, such as the Iraq War, as Mohammed said, that we're seeing its results, its effects to this day and age, that if we could stay on the ground and cover it, maybe more in-depth, things wouldn't have happened, things we can only theorize
Totally.
about.
Even things like the Iraq War.
Yeah, itself, exactly. Like the Iraq War itself,
where there was a lack of reporting on the weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein had, and eventually led to
a war that was completely, its cause, so to speak, or the agenda for was completely false. But nowadays, we're looking at, journalists all around the world. We have to rely on citizen journalism because going into those areas is much more, is more dangerous than we can imagine. Yeah. Also, to me, what was amazing is the streets of Turkey this weekend.
Yeah.
Where.
Yeah, we have a man who risks his life on a daily basis. His name is Naji Jerf. Risks his life on a daily basis to report on what's happening in Raqqa, in the Islamic State.
Right.
He's a father of 2 young children and so on. He makes documentaries. He gets to Turkey and he's assassinated on the street.
On the street, and I think we're going to just dedicate this bit to him. Do stay with us when